In today's video, I wanted to talk about my experience with the copper IUD. Obviously, this subject isn't going to be for everybody. I wanted to put it out there because when I was deciding whether or not I wanted to get the copper IUD, these videos, people sharing their anecdotes, their experiences, really helped me make that decision for myself. So here it is. First things first, I wanted to make sure we are clear. This is in no way me giving you advice on what you should do or shouldn't do. I am not an expert at anything, much less a doctor or medical professional of any sort. So this is just me sharing my experience. If you have questions or would like to know more about birth control options, that type of thing, I highly recommend talking to a licensed medical professional, your doctor perhaps. They are going to be the people that can give you the best advice, the best information. This is just me sharing my experience. Okay, let's get into it. Why I chose to get the copper IUD. First, I need to discuss my history with birth control. I went on the birth control pill when I was 17. At first, this was to help with my acne. And then eventually it was to serve as contraception. For a while, this worked for me. My acne cleared up and I didn't get pregnant, so it was doing its job. Eventually, my acne came back and I noticed that I was experiencing like really bad mood swings and panic attacks, both before and while I was on my period. I thought I might be experiencing PMDD. I never was diagnosed. I never even talked to a doctor about it. So I definitely don't want to diagnose myself or anything like that. But basically what I was experiencing was I felt like a completely different person around my period. And it wasn't just like, oh, I'm irritable or, oh, I'm feeling sad. It just was like one day I felt like my normal self. And the next day I was like a completely different person. And it wasn't like distinguishable to me. Like I just always felt like I was being myself, but like other people noticed, and I don't know, like I could notice too that like sometimes I was like a bubbly happy version of myself and sometimes I just was a miserable version of myself. It was really unpleasant for all parties. Me and everyone around me, I'm sure. I was on the pill from the time I was 17 to the time I was 24. I knew that like the terrible mood and all of that coincided with my period, but it wasn't until I was like 23, almost 24, when I realized that the panic attacks were also lining up with my periods. And when I figured that out, I felt like I needed to do something to just improve my quality of life. I decided to change my birth control method to see if this would fix anything. I was on the pill from the time I was 17 to the time I was 24, so that is 7 years of my life where I just felt like this was a normal way to be. I decided I wanted to go the hormone-free route just to kind of like have a clean slate and figure out if the pill was causing all of these side effects. If all of these issues went away, then great, problem solved. If not, then I knew that I had to figure out something else. Like I would need to go to therapy or talk to a doctor and find a solution to how miserable I was feeling around my period. Now let's talk about the IUD. My IUD insertion. My insertion experience wasn't great. If that might freak you out, then I recommend trying to find someone else's video because there are so many videos out there where people share amazing experiences where there were no issues and it wasn't painful and all that good stuff. My experience just wasn't one of those. It wasn't anything super terrible. It just like wasn't the smoothest process. So yeah, there's your disclaimer. Also, I have had the IUD for 5 years, so spoiler alert, it all worked out. This was 5 years ago, so I don't remember every single detail, but from what I can remember, this is how it went. I had my partner drive me to the appointment because I just was worried that, I don't know, I wouldn't feel well after and I would prefer to have somebody else drive me. I entered the doctor's office. The first thing the doctor tried to do was to convince me to get the hormonal IUD instead of the copper IUD. She said, and I quote, "Let me get on my soapbox for a second," and then proceeded to tell me all the reasons I shouldn't get the copper IUD. These mainly being like you're going to have more painful periods, they might be longer, they're going to be heavier potentially, and then just like let me know that she's seen a lot of people come in, get the copper IUD, and then like a few months later decide to come back because their periods were so unmanageable. I don't know. It just was kind of like disheartening to hear because I had done like so much research. I read reputable medical sources online. I watched a lot of videos like this, seeing how people's experiences went. So to like go in and then have her try to convince me otherwise was a bit frustrating. That being said, she didn't know that I had spent so much time making this decision, so all good. She just was like trying to inform me of things to look out for and all that, but it just was like I was already feeling stressed at the appointment, so then to have her come in and try to convince me to do something else made me feel a little uneasy, but I stuck to it. I told her that I wanted to go the non-hormonal route, and if it turns out in a few months I have to come back to get it removed, so be it. I'll learn from the experience and then choose a different route to go. She left the office to prepare, and while she was gone, I was like looking around the room and was reading all of the licenses and certificates on the wall and noticed that the name on all of them didn't match, and I was like, that's strange. But then I just figured like maybe they were short rooms, so she was using somebody else's room, and just kind of like didn't think anything of it. The doctor came back and introduced another doctor who was much older than she was, and she like mentioned that she'd be assisting with the procedure. So now let's get into like the nitty-gritty, what it was like, what happened. To preface, when I made the appointment, the nurse that I was making the appointment with told me to schedule it for when I would like next be on my period. She mentioned that this is helpful because it just kind of like makes your cervix less resistant or something. I can't remember exactly what she said, but she said it just makes the process easier if you are on your period when you get the IUD inserted. So that's what I did. They had me like lay down with my feet in stirrups. They use a speculum so they can more easily access your cervix. If you've ever had like a pap test, very similar situation. Next, they took a rod and inserted it into my cervix in order to measure my uterus. This was not very fun for me. At this point in my life, I had never had a period cramp, so I didn't even know what to compare this to. But now that I have had period cramps, the only thing I can compare this to is like the worst period cramp I've ever experienced, but somehow even worse than that. It just was like this really intense crampy feeling. But luckily, it doesn't last very long. They made it quick, so I was grateful for that. Then they moved on to the next step, which was actually inserting the IUD. When they inserted the IUD, I felt that crampy feeling, but again, this goes quickly, so it wasn't anything too terrible. At the bottom of the IUD, there are these really long strings. These are there to help the doctor remove the IUD when the time comes, but typically they're way too long, so the doctor will trim them to a more reasonable length. When the doctor went to cut my strings, I saw her eyes kind of go wide and then the older doctor kind of comfort her and say, it's okay, we'll just have to do it again. The younger doctor informed me that we would have to insert a new IUD. When she went to cut the strings, she accidentally yanked the IUD out, so they had to get a new IUD and do that process again. They didn't have to measure my uterus again or anything like that. They just had to do the insertion again. She like asked if I was okay and I was like, yeah, I'm totally fine, it's all good. But it was not all good. Internally I was like freaking out because I didn't want to feel that crampy feeling again, but let's just get this over with. I want to be done with this. So they did a new insertion. They went to cut the strings and all was well. It went fine the second time. They did an ultrasound to make sure that everything was in place correctly, and then when that was confirmed, I was allowed to go home. My first year with the copper IUD. Immediately after getting the IUD, I was already on my period, so I didn't notice any additional bleeding or anything. My period just kind of like finished out as it usually does, and then between then and my next period, I didn't have any additional like spotting or bleeding. I did experience some cramping that week immediately after the insertion, and so I just took ibuprofen and used a heating pad, and with that, it was manageable. On my following periods, I did notice I had a heavier flow, and my periods were definitely more painful. I was getting cramps regularly for that first year, and these would occur before I started my period and during my period. Nothing I couldn't manage, especially with ibuprofen and a heating pad, so I just made sure to have those available to me around my period. Luckily, I was working from home at the time, so I didn't have to like worry about going into the office, and I could like have the heating pad with me while I worked. I would say for the first 2 years, that was pretty normal for me, and then over the last few years, I've noticed my periods are less heavy and like most definitely less painful. Now, Like maybe I get kind of crampy, but not really. Very occasionally, I'll get like bad cramps and have to take an ibuprofen. But like, I don't know, I'd say 80 to 90% of the time, my period is like totally manageable without any like painkillers or anything like that. Do I like having the copper IUD? Well, I have had it for 5 years, so I would say yes. All of the issues I was experiencing with the pill have resolved. I no longer have like really intense mood swings. I can't remember the last time I had a panic attack. I still can be like irritable before my period and maybe like a little bit sad. Will like cry easier or whatever, but like I can see it coming on and I can like communicate that to like those around me, mainly my partner. I could be like, hey, I'm like feeling really sensitive, so be nice to me. He's always nice to me. I'm like, don't tease me, even like a joke. But anyway, so that's really awesome that I'm like no longer feeling like a different person every 2 weeks out of the month. The conclusion I've come to is I just like don't think that hormonal birth control works well with my body. And like that's not to demonize the pill at all. I know that for some people that's like the best option. It's the thing that's made them feel the best as far as their like contraception goes. Even if they don't need a contraception method, like the pill can really help with other things like acne or PMS or cramps. Like I know that it can be a really great resource for people. It just wasn't the best for me. One thing that I didn't expect to happen, but that I absolutely love is I feel way more connected to my body than I ever have. Again, I went on the pill when I was 17. I started my period when I was like almost 15. So less than 3 years later, I was taking the pill. I feel like I never really got to know or understand what my body felt like as a person that menstruates. Since coming off the pill, I like will have these thoughts and notice how I'm feeling and be like, I think I'm like probably in my follicular phase, or oh, I probably am ovulating, or I most definitely am in my luteal phase. And then I'll check my tracker and I'm like spot on every time. And so it's like really cool to like notice the phases of my cycle and like feel my body going through the cycle. And when I say cycle, I mean like the whole like 28-day cycle. You know, your like follicular phase, ovulation, your luteal phase, menstruation. Like it's cool to see my body go through that cycle and go through the ups and downs that come along with that, to be aware of that cycle so that I can know I'm not just feeling this way because I'm having a bad day. You know, I'm just in my luteal phase, so I'm a little bit more sensitive or I'm a little bit low energy, and that's totally fine. That was definitely unexpected, but I'm grateful that that has come out of this experience. So that has been my experience after 5 years with the copper IUD. Again, I'm not an expert, so if you have questions, I don't recommend leaving them in the comments because I probably won't have answers. But I would love to hear your experiences, whether you've had the copper IUD or not, or you've had experiences with a different birth control method. I would love to see what you have to say. I feel like it could be a really interesting discussion. So please drop those in the comments. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!